Welcome back for another episode of the 5G Guys. I'm Wayne Smith, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dan McVaugh.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back. Good to be back again. Welcome to another episode. Thanks for listening. As always, go to 5gguys.com to connect with us and share with your friends and family if you like what you're hearing. Today, we've got an encore episode with Peter Thermos, President and CTO of Palindrome Technologies. We had a prior episode talking about security and data integrity and the like. If you haven't heard that episode, go back and check it out. But Peter's the CTO and founder of Palindrome Technologies. He's got over 20 years of experience in information security and assurance. He's got clients that he consults to in both the government and private sector. And really what Palindrome does is they're sort of subject matter experts in various industries like telecom, energy, financial. And the work they do helps secure emerging technologies like internet multimedia applications, voice over IP, carrier grade networks like 4G, LTE, 5G, user equipment like 4G, 5G handsets, IoT devices. And in addition to the work that Palindrome does, and Peter being their CEO, he's also the author of a book called Securing Voice over IP Networks. It's by Addison Wesley, so check that out. He's also speaking at various conferences, publishing papers all the time. He's in trade magazines such as Forbes and Wired. So Peter, thanks for joining us again and coming back to have an encore discussion about security.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Wayne. Glad to be back.
When we last talked, we dove a lot into more general cybersecurity stuff. And then since then, we've been talking with you about this issue that some may have seen in the press about how a lot of our telecom infrastructure in the US is made by Chinese manufacturers, namely Huawei and ZTE, and how there's an initiative in the US right now to replace that equipment with non-Chinese manufacturers because of national security concerns. So I thought we could kick off today by teeing that topic up, introducing our audience to what's really going on there. How real is that concern of our national security as it relates to Chinese manufactured equipment and our telecom infrastructure, and then just sort of talk about that in general from there. Does that sound like a good topic, Peter, and something you can help us with?
Perfect. Yep, absolutely.
So explain to us what exactly is going on and how real is the concern?
So the fundamental issue we're facing is supply chain, or the security of the supply chain. So this topic emerged about 25, 30 years ago in the DoD. Now it has become more evident the past 10 years, and we've seen publications from various nations, including United States, as far as the threat of foreign adversaries implanting backdoors into software or hardware that are being used in telecommunication infrastructures. So telco is one of the primary, targets in case of war. Is part of the national critical infrastructure. And if an adversary has a foothold into the network elements that comprise the telecommunications infrastructure, that's a great vulnerability that needs to be addressed. So some of the OEMs, foreign OEMs, have been found after an analysis has been done, cybersecurity analysis that is, on their products. And they have been found to maintain poor security practices, and that can be on purpose. So the adversarial nation has always a mechanism or a backdoor and gain unauthorized access and deliver the type of attacks that wish to deliver. So the supply chain is critical in maintaining a robust cybersecurity posture in the DoD plus the nation itself.
So the real concern then is that through these backdoors, they can either basically spy on us and or initiate attacks on our infrastructure, on our wireless networks.
So one of the things that was found during the security analysis, it was that the products being deployed in telecommunication networks from specific vendors were full of vulnerabilities, and either the manufacturer didn't patch those vulnerabilities on purpose because poor security practices, or based on a directive that was initiated by a nation that they were providing services or collaborating with. So at the end of the day, we have products in any telecommunication network that can be compromised remotely, not just locally, but miles away, and have the ability to bring the entire telecommunications infrastructure to its knees if they wish to do so. So the supply chain, again, it's one of the areas that we need to get a better handle on. As companies contribute to the DoD or telecommunication infrastructure, we need to take responsibility and also help companies here in the United States that build or start to build radio equipment for telecommunications to assist in not only from a funding perspective, but also from a cybersecurity perspective.
Hey, real quick, a quick word of thanks to today's sponsor, Vertex Innovations. For over 17 years, Vertex has been building the nation's wireless and broadband networks. Providing project management, network engineering, and construction oversight are just some of the ways Vertex helps their clients. So if you're looking for more of a partner to help you with your wireless network designs, construction, implementation, or operations, reach out to Vertex. You can find them at vertex-us.com. That's vertex-us.com.
A question that I had, there's been a lot of hype around the Chinese equipment and different foreign in the equipment. Do we know of a documented breach over the last 3 or 4 years that's come from telecom network? Or is that more or less theorizing that the backdoors exist and that the breach is
a documented breach? No, not in the sense that a specific telecommunication equipment was used, there was a breach, and they traced it back to the vendor. But there have been instances where security researchers have found backdoors in handsets, radio equipment, network management equipment, where the vendors implanted them by default, and they were in all their releases, and they were made public. And it took quite a while for them to, alleviate those issues. But there have been documented instances from researchers where backdoors were found. Now, the K equivalent of the NSA, British Communications Headquarters, GHQ, that organization was able to produce a report based on some of the telecommunications products that they analyzed, and they found a number of vulnerabilities. But again, based on our experience, and my personal experience is that those products are poorly maintained in terms of radio vulnerabilities, patching, default credentials, or poor coding practices that they follow, and introduce new vulnerabilities. So again, it may be on purpose or it may be just pure negligence.
And so, to my knowledge, the federal government has gotten smack in the middle of this issue for a number of years now. I know back when 4G networks were being deployed, the federal government, I know when Sprint was deploying their 4G network, they had actually contracted with, I believe it was Huawei, Chinese manufacturer, to build at least part of their radio network for their 4G network. And the federal government stepped in and said, no, we don't want that. And Sprint complied and changed their plans and ended up going with manufacturers that were not out of China. But, and as far as I know, the other big carriers, Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, have also used non-Chinese manufacturers for their radio access network equipment. However, what a lot of people don't know is that there are upwards of 90 regional small cellular network operators that the big carriers use as partners to extend their footprint. And a large number of those smaller mom and pop cellular operators have built networks using ZTE, a Chinese company, Huawei, another Chinese company like we've talked about. And as I understand it, the FCC and the federal government are actually providing funds to those companies in an initiative to rip that equipment out and replace it with non-Chinese manufacturer equipment. Is that, did I get that right, Peter?
Indeed. A couple of initiatives from the U.S. government to do exactly that. One is to help incumbent telecommunication providers replace their existing gear and also help beef up cybersecurity practices within those telcos. Because, again, from an adversary's perspective, they most likely going to go after the low-hanging fruit. So if I was an adversary and not able to directly penetrate Sprint, AT&T, or Verizon, guess what? I'm going to go through a partner, telco, or a vendor, product vendor, just like we've seen with SolarWinds, and try to compromise that vector and get unauthorized access and deliver attacks.
Thanks, Peter. That kind of confirms what I thought. The other thing that I've started realizing as part of this issue is that I don't think we have a single radio access network OEM manufacturer in the US that's American based right now. I think they're all foreign, right? Now some of them are, Nokia out of Finland, Ericsson also out of Europe. But is that the case?
Correct. At the moment, we do not have U.S. radio-based manufacturers. We rely on an Ericsson mostly, which are European countries, part of NATO. They have been allies. I mean, U.S. and the corresponding Finland, Sweden are doing cyber exercises and also normal warfare exercises. But yeah, the short answer is unfortunately we do not. But the U.S. government has started promoting and providing incentives for companies here in the United States to start building radio equipment.
Got it. And who would be some of the candidate companies that people might be familiar with that would be examples of companies that might get back into that?
There haven't been any public announcements yet. There is some suspicion older Motorola product teams, they might spring up radio equipment. Intel may go into that game as well, but nothing officially.
And a lot of the chipsets that are behind this infrastructure, especially in the subscriber devices, the handsets, those are made by either Qualcomm or Intel. Those are the two leading manufacturers of those chipsets. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, the baseband modems on the handsets and most of the devices that we see out there, yeah, they're based on Qualcomm and Intel.
Got it. So what other kinds of security threats is wireless specifically posing? So for example, I saw, I don't know, it was 2020 or some program once where some guys hacked into a car using the Bluetooth that was on the car, and they literally took control of the car, the braking system, the acceleration system, the steering system. Is that a legit concern? And how knowledgeable are you of that as it relates to the technology and where we're at in wireless?
Yeah, yes, that is true. And there's still attacks that can be carried over any RF radio frequency. It depends, the receiving end, how well has been programmed in terms of the source code, the actual code that runs on the hardware. So if that manufacturer maintains poor programming practices, not even secure, but just in general, poor programming practices, yeah, you're going to see issues. And always it comes back to the code that is running on that hardware. So the testing that we do man-in-the-middle type of attacks for Bluetooth, NFC, and then all the way up to the frequency where you look at 3G, 4G, nowadays 5G. So we're looking at all the radio frequencies, and the most important thing to attack in order to gain access or perform man-in-the-middle is the protocol stack. And once you get a good understanding and identify vulnerabilities there, basically you can control both ends of the communications. Granted, there are other type of attacks like service disruption through jamming and interference, but those are just, service disruption attacks. They don't aim in gaining access. But yes, in the past, there have been instances, and we see instances during our testing because we do testing for V2X, vehicle to infrastructure communication, and other type of industries, including robotics and some of the healthcare, where they use RF, including Bluetooth, NFC, or other frequencies, Wi-Fi, to communicate between devices and the users.
Give us some examples of the types of things that are going on with 5G as it relates to security compared to 2G, 3G, and we touched a little bit on this in the previous episode with you, but it feels like while there seems to be more potential vulnerability, that there's also a lot more going on in the standards bodies and in the industry, the manufacturing industry, to be more proactive about making security a forethought versus an afterthought. Can you talk a little bit about your exposure to that through Palindrome and how that may or may not be the case?
Sure, and that's a very good question. So 5G addresses several vulnerabilities that have been found with 2G, 3G, and in some instances with 4G, especially when it comes to location tracking. But then the fact that we bring in access edge computing in order to improve performance for the user experience, that introduces a number of threats. So the mobile edge cloud, you have closer proximity to the tower and the processing, if you will, of that application, whether it's augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, or machine-to-machine type of communication. The infrastructure that supports that needs to be secure, and we're kind of lacking in that area. With 5G, we introduce, yes, some protection mechanisms, but at the same time, we increase the level of complexity that we see for the core network, because there are a number of what they call network functions that are distributed in the cloud. And on top of it, you have the applications that rely on those cloud resources and themselves will be on different cloud enclaves, whether they're public, multi-tenant, or private. You'll see them there. So that kind of opens up the level of complexity and another set of threats or attack vectors that can be realized. And the fact that we also going to start seeing private 5G networks being deployed, that will increase the responsibility of enterprise organizations to manage security when it comes to 5G and MEC, mobile edge computing. So from one hand, we have the alleviation of older vulnerabilities, if you will, like eavesdropping, IMSI, catching. You may have heard some of these type of attacks between 2G, 3G, and to some extent 4G. So 5G will help alleviate those, but then it's going to introduce some other areas of concerns and challenges that we need to tackle.
Yeah, I think, one thing that's came to mind, when you speak of 5G and networks, we hear a lot about the IoT side of the world and the vulnerabilities that it creates. I mean, some of the projections from where we're at today is that we'll have close to 75 billion different wireless IoT devices by 2025. And so I know we talked a little bit about the component level of those, but, everything that are around us, including 5G, we're going to be connected in a way. What do you guys see as the risk of the IoT world? Because before long, it will be all IoT that's running on the wireless networks, pretty much the majority or high percentage. So, how are we going to look at security when that many devices are connected?
We're going to go back to smoke signals.
I figured. There's a lot of devices.
We're going to use reverse psychology. Well, yeah, IoT is a big area, and where we see vulnerabilities issues coming up, number one is the actual firmware being used in those IoT devices. In the past, you had embedded devices that possibly used, a few thousand lines of code. Nowadays, that has exponentially grown because the same type of devices are expected to do more. Open source, leveraging open source is a blessing and a curse in certain instances, because you bring in code that you don't know it was written or hijacked at some point by an adversary, and they have implanted malicious code. And then you start looking at the network interfaces between the IoT devices and the back end. So yes, you have another layer to be concerned about. It's not just the firmware itself. After it starts operating, let's assume that the firmware is kosher and you've done due diligence. Once you have a device that communicates with the rest of the network or other devices and accumulates data and information, you have the issue of identifying or mitigating vulnerabilities at the network stack itself. So again, that network stack may use third-party libraries, open source software, which can be analyzed by adversaries, identify vulnerabilities, and then attack those devices directly. So from a security perspective, you have to look at all the layers. You have to do defense in depth, plus what we start calling nowadays zero trust. So those two concepts go hand in hand in order to increase your cybersecurity posture as an enterprise user, whether you have IoT devices or any other type of infrastructure to maintain and provide services to your users. So those two concepts are, I believe, key concepts to move forward in order and improve your overall cybersecurity posture.
Peter, is there also a lot of work going on with regard to AI and reliance on AI to proactively identify risks, defend against risks? Do carriers, in addition, have the ability to say, well, let's say hypothetically that, there's, tens of millions of a certain type of IoT device, a doorbell of some type, for example, that has been identified as a threat, to literally deny access to the network, for example, to eliminate that threat until it can be resolved? Or what's going on? I know I asked a couple of questions there, but it's sort of a convergence of things, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So AI, again, if you understand AI properly, you can do some really interesting, good things. If you don't understand AI, you may introduce more problems. So some organizations take AI and say, our technology is based on AI and we do X, Y, Z. And then once you start throwing off that AI model by injecting malicious type of, whether it's images or patterns to be processed, and you influence the judgment of the AI, then you have a flawed AI that is vulnerable to those type of attacks, and it's game over. That's what it comes down to. So yes, it's good if you can implement it properly, but it can be a double-edged sword.
Feels like we're walking on the ledge of a building, and on the other side could be some really good things, but a lot of potential pitfalls along the way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's what we've seen. I mean, I've been in cybersecurity since 1995. I had the opportunity to work with some really smart guys back at Belcor, where things like the first vulnerability scanner was ever built or invented, if you will, Pingware or ESKI. Now this is the Secure ID and some other interesting innovations from a security perspective. And all this time, it comes down to the implementation. We see that technology is moving forward and security is always one step behind that evolution of technology. And that's what we have to start managing better. So with every new technology, if we take every new technology and shift a little bit, as they say, to the left, our DevOps or SecDevOps, and implement security from the initial stages, from requirements, design, then we're going to have much better chance in deploying a robust and secure solution. It's not going to be 100%, but at least it's going to eliminate all the low-hanging fruit and make it much harder for adversaries to compromise a device or a network.
Awesome. Well, it's good to know that we've got smart folks like you behind the scenes, looking out for all of our best interests, hopefully keeping us one step ahead of the bad guys, or at least not too many steps behind them, depending on which situation it is. But this is very helpful to kind of help wrap our hands around security and where we're headed in the near future and long term. But so thanks for joining us again, Peter. It's very, very helpful. Tell everyone again how they can get in touch with you and Palindrome and get your help if it's something they need help with.
Sure. You can reach us over the web at www.palindrometech.com. You can send email directly to me at peter@palindrometech.com. And just one note, a lot of times people ask me, how the name came up, and that's a concept that we had to study in computer science back in college on a string of characters and determining whether it's a palindrome or not. But in our world, we see palindrome relationships with our customers as a mutual trust that we build with our customers, because they provide information, intellectual property to us, and we're trying to protect that and help them protect it themselves. So for us, it's a palindrome trust that we're building with our customers.
That's awesome. Again, thanks for joining us. It's definitely a deep subject. There's a lot of avenues, it makes you feel good that, and I think sometimes we underestimate the amount of effort that the folks providing the services, the carriers and stuff, are actually putting into to protect the consumer. So it's a big hats off to them that they're being proactive in the way that they build their networks into the future, whether it's 5G or not, or private networks, that they're looking out for threats into the future so that we can enjoy the comfort that IoT and the networks bring to us as a consumer. So
very well said. Yes, they're investing a lot of resources and time to help secure the nation's infrastructure. So yeah, we should keep supporting them and encourage them to continue doing so.
Perfect.
Thanks. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us again. As always, I'd love to hear your feedback. If you have any questions, anything we got wrong, go to 5gguys.com. You can subscribe to the podcast there or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. So thanks for joining us. Until next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
everyone.
Thanks for listening to the 5G Guys. For more resources and to connect with Dan and Wayne, check out their website at 5gguys.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that follow button and share this episode with your friends and family.